Hey guys, welcome to the channel, The Agnostic Philosopher. I'm Don. We're just expanding our horizons here. I look at videos, I grab videos generally off of YouTube. They can be shorts, could be long form. And I just look at how arguments are being made, what the arguments are, and just in the hope of expanding my understanding, not necessarily or not exclusively about the way things quote unquote are or scientific findings or what have you. But even things that are ridiculous, just as a matter of human interest, if you will, just to see how do people believe certain things, or how do they come to believe that, or where's the weakness in the chain of argumentation, things like that. So anyway, I don't take a dogmatic stance on things. I just assess whether or not an argument seems to make sense, and then share some of my other thoughts just based on my background and education. And in this one, we're looking at, I got a gentleman named Quentin Smith. Don't know him, but I saw the title of the video and I said I was going to do it. Arguments that God does not exist. So let's find out. And it doesn't bother me whether somebody believes in God. It doesn't bother me if they don't. It doesn't bother me like me if they're just not sure and they acknowledge in ways the limits epistemologically, but of what we can know and what we can posit. My position about the existence of God is that I can't say there's no God. There's so much that we don't know in this world. So I simply leave the door open. And I used to be a fundamentalist Christian going back about 2.5 decades for a couple of years. But then I'm more curious, more philosophical. And so I just kind of move along. And so let's see where Quentin Smith comes down on this.
Quentin, I have really desired to know whether there is a God, as many people. I've certainly heard the theistic arguments, many of them from different styles, not just theistic arguments, but arguments for supernatural causes. I really need to and want to understand the atheistic argument, arguments not just against the theists, but affirmative arguments for atheism.
Good point. Good way.
I think an affirmative argument for atheism would be that a naturalistic conception of the world based on science, it can completely explain why the universe exists and why the universe began to exist in the Big Bang, and it can explain why the universe was caused to exist. Because there's no first initial instant that's uncaused that God could cause. Because take a real line segment, which is all decimals, and taken from 0 to 1. Now, according to current science, at the 0 instant, there is no state universe at all because it's physically impossible. And there is no earlier instant than that, and there's no earliest instant that is the one immediately next after 0, because the nature of real numbers is there's a continuum between them.
And it's an infinite number of real numbers between 0 and 1.
Right, exactly, right.
So you can run the movie back as far as you want. There's always going to be something before it.
Right, and right. Something before it means that every single instant is caused by earlier instance, and you're never going to find an instant that's not caused by earlier instance.
And you believe that that explanation...
This is a circular line of reasoning so far. I don't know where he's going to go with this, but he's simply saying that by definition, all right, by my definition, we can't go further back to 0. So the way the entire thought experiment is being set up, it precludes going prior or even back to 0, because 0 is the state of being uncaused, basically. So he's saying we can't get there, and that's why there's no God. And I'm not disparaging it. I love the way he's presenting this. It's giving me a lot to think about, but it's unconvincing so far. He's got room to go, but he's setting it up. He's setting this whole thought experiment up so that you can't go back and say that there's God. And he's saying that this is the naturalistic scientific approach that doesn't need any prior causation to it, simply because the way we've structured our numbering system between 0 and 1, there's an infinite number of possibilities, such that the prior one, however infinitesimally small that number is or gets close to 0, I guess it's asymptotic, nonetheless, there is something that caused that which preceded it. It's an interesting conception, though.
Is a full 100% causal explanation for the existence of the whole universe.
Yes, and I think it shows that it's not possible for something else like God or any external cause to cause the universe, because that is sufficient to cause the universe.
So that's your first argument affirmatively for atheism. What's a second?
Well, a second could be that theism, it tries to have it both ways in its arguments by assuming part of science and then as a picture of the universe, and then trying to explain it in terms of God, which is a notion that's inconsistent with science. Like they might take...
He's not staying within the basic premise of only affirmative arguments affirming atheism. And I'm just looking at the way the argument's structured. There may not be a God, so this doesn't faze me to whether or not he's right or not. But as a matter of an argument goes, the way the gentleman who initially asked the question, he said, we've heard about the arguments against God and all this, but can you give us a reason for the atheistic or for atheism? And right now, he's not abiding by that directive. His first argument did. His first argument was about causation and how we can look at causation and say that which immediately preceded it, no matter how small or infinitesimally small it may seem essentially, is a cause of the event that followed it. And so we could go back and we have an infinite number of causal relationships, and neither one needs to advert to a God or creator. In this argument, number two, now he's going after theism and saying how theism does not accurately or adequately explain contra science, why it doesn't explain things well enough. That's why. So now he's struggling.
The so-called fine-tuning of the values just after the Big Bang that were just right for the evolution of human life. But they're relying on science to reach that conclusion. But if they're relying on science, they can't consistently try and explain that with an idea that's inconsistent with science. Science says there are no minds without bodies. And
okay, science doesn't say anything. People say that. People who are looking at observation, looking at testing that base our rational minds, if you will, on a certain way of thinking. But this is very circular, and I've seen this, and theists do this as well. How do you know the Bible is true? Because the Bible says it's true. And you're like, well, that's circular. You need more premises than that to make your argument. And he's saying the same thing. He's basically, by definition, saying anybody who posits that there might be something outside what science says is legitimate, they are illegitimate. But that's just circular. You're not saying anything in that. You're just saying, here's how we do it, why we think what we think, and we're excluding that line of thinking. Plain and simple. We're not going to look at it. And you may come up with the right conclusion by eliminating that, but that doesn't mean that it's a sound argument. It might be a valid one, but it's not a sound one.
If you believe there are, you're rejecting the scientific method. And so you're rejecting the very method that led you in the first place to the fine-tuning at the beginning of the universe that you want to try and explain.
So you're rejecting the fine-tuning argument as exemplifying the internal inconsistency of using that argument in support of some supernatural explanation.
Right. This is like saying, I accept a scientific theory, but I'm going to explain that scientific theory by a theory that contradicts science.
It doesn't.
And that itself is a contradiction.
Have to.
You can't explain a scientific data by an explanation that contradicts the method and data and theories that
But this is the way knowledge, or so-called knowledge, grows. This is the way any field anywhere grows, is there are quote unquote contradictions, or that which contradicts certain evidence. I mean, Einstein himself had the theory of relativity and the special theory of relativity. And that's because there were divergencies in the observations. And so we need to account for it. And this is the way, quote unquote, progress or understanding, or that which seems to be more reliable to us, happens. So, yeah, there are ideas that go against prevailing knowledge or go outside it, but that's how our understanding of things has always grown. So, this so far is unconvincing.
Our evidence for that data.
And the theistic argument that is contradicting science is what?
Oh, any theistic argument. I mean, any theistic argument regarding the creation of the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang, the fine-tuning, the arguments involving evolution, they all are inconsistent with science, because they started off and say, well, here's what science shows us as some evidence. Now, this is evidence for God. Well, once they make that move, that's the contradiction.
Could be.
Aren't you engaging in your own vicious cycle? Because you're going from an assumption of that everything, you're defining theism as anti-science. So anything
Right.
that theism then does is a contradiction.
Oh, I want to see where it goes with this, because that's the point that I made earlier. And I haven't seen this video at all, but it's kind of easy to spot. So virtually everything so far, and I have to figure a way through this, but virtually every argument I've seen, not of his, anywhere on planet Earth, appears to be circular. And I'm going to have to figure out a way, and maybe that is the way understanding works. All right, let's see where he goes with this.
Because any theistic assumption is anti-science by your definition.
Yes, I think theism was, in effect, the science of over 2,000 years ago. And it would be like somebody now believing Aristotle's science, when in fact they've missed the change with Galileo and Newton, and missed a further change with Einstein and quantum mechanics, and they're still trying to believe a worldview that made sense only with Aristotle.
In the sense that theism was the dominant worldview for a long period of time, in its different forms, in its Greek form, or in its early Christian form, Middle Age Christian form, Hindu. The various cultures in the world have had a very long culture of theism as its dominant worldview. Today, the dominant worldview is certainly science. And so theism has in essence become the opposition as opposed to the majority.
Right. Today, there's a poll recently in Nature showing 93% of the top scientists are atheists. Now, the reason for that is that Aristotelian science had a place for a God to exist as moving what they call the heavens, which they thought the stars moved around the earth. But subsequent to that, both Galileo and Newton showed that assumption was false, and also Einstein's and quantum mechanics showed it was false, and they were able to explain things that not only did not need a God to explain things, but precluded God as a possible explanation.
Yeah, I don't want to leave that poll unanswered, because indeed it's true, but if you look at some of the data beneath that, a much higher percentage of not top scientists do believe in God. I think the number's like 40% or more. And one cannot rule out a sociological explanation to where top scientists, because of their visibility or recognition, feel obligated to be part of the dominant culture. I mean, one can make an argument, because it's not 93% of all scientists, it's 93% of a segment of scientists.
Right.
I like this guy.
Well, one can put it this way, that there's a greater proportion of scientists who believe that God does not exist than there is of any other academic or non-academic field. And the question is, why is that?
I think I think it's true, and it's an important question.
It is an important question. It's also a bit tendentious because, again, we're getting back to definitions and we're saying top scientists believe this. Well, one, that's an appeal to authority. That's a logical fallacy where you look at it. These people say this thing, therefore it's true, or therefore it's more reliable. I like the second statement better. We do look at what other people say. We do have that, but the gentleman that was asking the questions, very fair-minded questions. He said, okay, you're looking at a very small sample. Top scientists, whatever that means. What is a top scientist? Somebody who's been published 10 or more times in the leading journals? Well, then you've got, it's sort of like Hollywood actresses are stunningly beautiful. Okay, and therefore you make the leap to saying, therefore it's true that all women are beautiful. It's like, no, there's a selection process that's already happening. Not all women are beautiful. Not all men are good looking. I mean, the way we categorize it, but there's a certain standard that is being applied to get people in movies in the first place. So if all you had to study a culture was looking at Hollywood movies or the top selling movies, you'd likely find very beautiful women in there. And you might adduce that or infer that all women are beautiful in that country. Well, not true. So here, the validity about top scientists is not established, that does not establish an atheistic perspective. Now, I'm not convinced that there is a God. I'm saying simply as a matter of how these arguments are made. This gentleman asked very good questions because those were the same ones that I had too, that it's a bit tendentious or misleading to say, well, these top people think this, therefore it's true or truer. I'd never even thought of the next part of it that the questions the gentleman said is that, okay, but the lower tier, if you're going to create a caste system among it, I don't know how that lower tier would be categorized. Maybe somebody who's only published 2 scientific books or something and works in academia somewhere. Those people, 40% of those people do believe in a higher power, none of which is relevant to the issue. None of it. You know, when one bird takes off, the whole flock takes off. It's just better safe than sorry. I mean, people do the same thing too, where we look at those around us and we kind of follow the leader, if you will, whoever that leader may be. And it may be an accident that that person becomes a leader. What was that movie with Peter Sellers where he was a gardener? People thought he was the world's leading economist. There was a mistake making because a journalist went to interview the owner of this mansion, and that person had died, and like that morning or something. And then the journalist came, and the gardener, played by Peter Sellers, was very slow, cerebrally, mentally handicapped, put it that way. But not so much that the people would understood that. So the journalist came, and the journalist thought that the gardener was the actual world leading economist. And so this gardener could only speak in gardening terms. And so when asked about the economy, he spoke about when you water the plants and then you wait a season and then it grows. And then the journalist interpreted that as, I see the economy is going to grow. Right now we're watering it. So he interpreted it in economic and financial terms. And then eventually this gardener became a world-renowned economist. And people just inferred from what he was saying that he was speaking in economic terms. And I just use that as an example that the mere fact that there are top scientists, so to speak, or 97% or 93%, whatever number he said, above 90% were atheists, that proves nothing about whether there is or isn't a God. You know, it might be a happy thing to relate to. If you happen to be an atheist, you're going to use that as one of your calling cards or one of your trump cards, if you will. But that doesn't prove anything any more than the opposite side, where you could ask 100% of top televangelists is there a God? And 100% of them say that there is. That doesn't mean anything. You still have to look at what's your standard of proof. How are you coming up with it? So these are philosophical perspectives, and I'm one of the gentleman who was asking the questions. I like him a lot. He's on the screws. He's got it going on. So all right, guys, that was fun. Hope you enjoyed that. Leave your comments. I read them. Please like, share, subscribe, the usual. Have a great day. I'll see you on another video. Keep thinking philosophically.